It's time for the Newsmaker Show on News Talk AM 1480 WLEA.
I'm Brian O'Neill. Welcome to the Newsmaker Show. And before we get to our guest, this message from the Doran family and the WLEA staff. They just wanted to thank everyone who came to the wake, the funeral, sent flowers and food, and for all the cards and letters and calls and thoughts and prayers for station owner Kevin Doran, who passed away last week. Our guest this morning is Congressman Chris Gibson. The Congressman's district goes from, I think, Binghamton to Cooperstown to Kingston. Congressman Gibson, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Brian, good to be with you. Before we get started, let me express my condolences. Very, very sorry for the loss, and I know what a heavy loss it is for the region, and certainly you and your family are in my thoughts and prayers.
Newsmax.com reported that one of your core issues in a possible race for governor in 2018 would be the SAFE Act. Do you think that with the new leadership in the Democrat Assembly, with Sheldon Silver being gone, with Carl Heastie being the head of the Assembly, do you think you could get a little bit more done on SAFE Act reform or get rid of it even completely?
I absolutely believe that. And look, I mean, when you look at my temperament as a legislator in the Congress, I stand on principle, but on budget matters, I'm able to work together with the other side, and I think this is the fundamental point. I mean, for us, I just gave you a long reason why I believe the SAFE Act doesn't make us safer, and it steps on our liberties, and I'm absolutely interested in safe and secure. And I gave you those 3 points that we need to proceed along if we want to have safer communities. By the way, all you have to do is look at rural America. Crime rates in rural America that generally align with the 3 approaches I mentioned: mental health, although we can do, I think, better even in rural America on that, supporting law enforcement and supporting the Second Amendment. These are among the reasons why you see low crime rates in rural America. And as it relates to repealing the SAFE Act, I think we have to start with the premise that in a state like New York, we're going to have to work with the Assembly Democrats. There's no question on that. But there are things that Assembly Democrats, with a heavy population from New York City, there are some things that they want to have enacted. And I would tell you that for our caucus, for Republicans serving in government, we have to listen to them and find ways that we can come to an agreement where something that New York City really wants, perhaps it's transportation infrastructure or maybe even education of some kind. And then they have to then recognize the fact that the SAFE Act hasn't made us safer, and we want that repealed, and that we're willing to address mental health. So there was actually parts of that bill that we could rip out from the SAFE Act. We could repeal the SAFE Act, and we could bring Kendra's law back as a standalone item, and we could pass that and enact that, along with other measures that support our mental health and then also law enforcement and the Second Amendment. So, Brian, I would tell you absolutely there are ways that we can work with the party opposite, and we can find ways to find common ground and to certainly work with each other and to listen to each other. I think, those were skills that were very important to me when I was overseas in Iraq. And among the many challenges I had to deal with dozens of sheikhs, all who brought their own interests to the table, and I would have to find ways to listen and mediate and find ways to get to the win-win for all. So I think that is, and I want to be very candid, that is going to be what's required. Anybody who's promising you they can just come in and get rid of it without having to go through that process, I think, is not being realistic. We have to be able to work to be able to get rid of the SAFE Act.
One of Governor Andrew Cuomo's recent major decisions was to set up an independent investigator to look into police-involved deaths. And you're looking to run for governor in 2018, Congressman Gibson. If you were elected governor, how do you feel about that policy? Would you want to continue the policy of having an independent investigator, or maybe take a look at that again?
Well, I think we'd have to take a look at it again. Let me be just clear right up front, Brian. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be on the show. And as you pointed out, my number one focus is my service. I work for 11 counties in upstate New York. But as you alluded to, I am looking at the possibility of running for governor in 2018. So, I think it's a very fair question that you're asking. Let me put the context to the question. I think that the issue before us is one of safe and secure. That's something I know a little bit about from my time in the military and serving 4 tours in Iraq. This issue gets sidetracked, because of people like Governor Cuomo. He wants to make the issue gun control. Well, look, the facts are these, that his emphasis on gun control, targeting law-abiding citizens, it doesn't work. You won't be safer. And what you really do is you divide our nation, you divide our state, and you step on our individual liberties. So with regard to the issue of safe and secure, which I think is, if you think about what the first function of government is, we go back to the Declaration of Independence, the founding era, and the Constitution, the whole purpose, the Declaration points out, our rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then it goes on to say, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So I certainly want to distinguish my approach to this as different from, folks like Jeb Bush. He said, well, stuff happens. Well, that's not good enough. I mean, what our responsibility is to protect our people. This is why I feel very passionate about protecting us from Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, and any other would-be adversaries, and also making sure here at home that we're safe and secure. The question is how to do it, because Cuomo and others, they think the way to do that is to target law-abiding citizens. And as I pointed out, it doesn't work, and it's contra to the Bill of Rights. So then, if that doesn't work, what should we do? I would argue 3 things. And it starts by, first of all, understanding the threats that we have to safe and secure. We have 2 fundamental threats. One are what I would call irrational actors, and those would be individuals with psychoses that may be hearing voices. And, when you look at Newtown, that's Sandy Hook, Aurora, Arizona, California, incidents where we've had mass shootings, what they all had in common was an individual with psychoses. And our nation, we have not put the proper focus on mental health support. And in the Congress, I'm a leader on this. I'm in the caucus for mental health. I get the great benefit of my wife, Mary Jo. We've been together for over 20 years. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she provides tremendous insight to me. And I think there's so much more we need to be doing to particularly to address all mental health, but particularly those with psychosis, because that's been part of the issue to safe and secure. Okay, the other 2 points, I mentioned mental health, now get directly to your question. The second point is that what we need to do is enact policies that draw in closer the relationship between the protected and the protectors. So what Cuomo is doing and what others are doing when they criticize, ostracize law enforcement is not helpful. We should be doing just the opposite. We need to support our law enforcement professionals, and we need to nurture that relationship between law enforcement professionals and help them to better understand those that they're protecting. For example, in one of my 11 counties, I have Columbia County, and that's one of my 11 counties, we have a sheriff here that has a pilot program where he's going into part of our inner city in Hudson, and he's getting to better understand the community, and he's looking to recruit from that community to bring them in the sheriff's department. So that all of this, the second point is supporting the law enforcement. And then the third point, if you want safe and secure, you support the Second Amendment. And here's why. It has to do with deterrence. Earlier I was alluding to safe and secure overseas, and I'm a big believer in what is considered the approach peace through strength. This was a very Reagan-esque, Ronald Reagan's approach that ended up allowing us to win the Cold War and to be in a position of overmatch when we were in the Persian Gulf War. As it applies to international relations, it also applies to actions here at home. If you think about it, I talked about irrational actors. The second 2 general threats, or the second threat to safe and secure, are the rational actors. These are your people with evil intent that want to break into your home, and they either want to steal from you or perhaps kill and steal from you. That's why the Second Amendment is so important, is because an individual with evil intent, when they know that that individual in that home is armed, that deters them from going in and executing that crime, conducting that crime. This is my point to you, Brian, is, as it comes to the Cuomo's approach, which is to target law-abiding people and to ostracize or somehow question law enforcement, these are 2 approaches I think that will move us in the opposite direction that we need to go. Certainly we want the police accountable. There's no question on that. And certainly we want our law enforcement to be understanding the community, no question on that. But the way that Cuomo has gone about this, I think, has actually undermined safe and secure, not strengthened it.
On minimum wage, there was an article in Capital New York that says you'd like to see federal minimum wage at $8 or $9 an hour. Governor Andrew Cuomo is wanting to move the state minimum wage up to $15 an hour. Did you have any thoughts on minimum wage, Congressman Gibson?
Well, I'll tell you, what the governor's doing, it's going to run jobs right out of New York State. And let me say on this that, I grew up in a working-class family. My dad was a mechanic. He was in the building construction trades. I understand, the challenges for working-class families firsthand. And let me say this, too, that for those companies that can afford to pay their people $15 or greater, I say thank you. I greatly appreciate that. But what about the companies who can't? The companies who can't afford to pay $15, are we going to use the weight of the government to force them? Let's recognize what the unintended consequences of any potential changes on that score would do. Well, we have some ways of studying that, because you see that out in Seattle and other places. The first thing is that it's likely that you'll see a reduction in hours for individual. You also could see a reduction in benefits. And then finally, worst case scenario, you could see the companies just move right out of New York State. And then we lose the jobs altogether, and we lose the tax base. So again, for the companies that can afford to do it, I say thank you. And I certainly want all Americans to live to their God-given potential and to live a flourishing form of life. But this is really a question of judgment. And what should we do with those small businesses, particularly in upstate New York, where any kind of change like this, moving to a mandatory $15 minimum wage, would absolutely have adverse impacts to jobs and impacts on the individual. So, this is what I think part of the problem is that, we see the governor move forward on these issues without fully thinking it through and what the second and third order effects are.
Talking with Congressman Chris Gibson. Congressman, from reading an article about you in the New York Times, I see that the state teachers union said back in April that if you ran for governor, it would be likely that you would get the endorsement from NYSUT because of your anti-Common Core stance. Congressman, from reading your bio on the House of Representatives website, it says, you've had teenage children too. And, from talking to the politicians who have kids in school and have had kids in school, that seems to be an influence on those who oppose the Common Core. Congressman Gibson, your thoughts on Common Core?
Well, I think it's absolutely the wrong approach. I support empowerment and local accountability. This certainly isn't about escaping accountability. 29 years in uniform, I lived a life of accountability, but I think there's a right way to do that. And what you see with Common Core, this is too much top-down driven attempts to homogenize graduates, which is really, I think, antithetical to the human spirit. And it relies on an onerous, high-stakes testing regime, which is contrary to learning and has, in fact, created a culture of teaching to the test. I've never seen teacher morale so challenged right now. And, look, teachers are special. I mean, they already know they're not going to be rich, but they get to be rich at heart by inspiring, inculcating, and yes, educating. So instead of Common Core, which I would roll back, I would start over again. Because, this is, a wise man once told me years ago, when you're in a hole, the first thing you should do is stop digging. And this is why I just don't understand why the governor doubled down on Common Core when it is so clear that it's failing us. There are other issues, too. There's issues with this curriculum. They forged this curriculum and brought it forward without the significant input of the stakeholders. And Brian, as a former brigade commander, I can't imagine finalizing my operations orders for my paratroopers without considering the input of my non-commissioned officers and my paratroopers. It was so vitally important to the success of the operation. The idea that we brought forward Common Core without listening to teachers and administrators and parents, it was essentially too corporate influenced, and I think that was a major mistake. And as a consequence, you see, in my view, a very politically correct curriculum. You see an age-inappropriate curriculum, and you see potential invasion of privacy for our students all kinds of issues in addition to the ones I mentioned at the outset. I think the approach that works best is local empowerment, and that means rolling back the unfunded mandates too, and the reliance on the the owner's high-stakes testing. And what I believe instead is you hold accountable your local school boards, and we already have a process to do that. We have elections for our school boards, so if they're not getting it right, they're going to get fired. And likewise, the local school boards can also work with local administrators who also can have policies that work with teachers. So, I think this is in the best interest of students, parents, teachers, and administrators that we roll back Common Core, that we empower the stakeholders here and work towards excellence. One final point on this, Brian. That one of the things I also saw in the military is if you want your organization to pursue excellence, if you want them to achieve excellence, then you need this shared buy-in on the vision, and then you need a focus on professional development. This was so important in the military. We spend an enormous amount of time on leader development. As a brigade commander, you would always mentor 2 levels down. So as a brigade commander, myself and my sergeant major, our focus for leader development were our company commanders and first sergeant. Likewise, right below me, I had 6 battalion commanders. Those battalion commanders and sergeant majors would be working on platoon leaders and platoon sergeants. And we would spend 4 hours a month in intense mentorship with our mentorees. And what I've noticed in Cuomo's approach is he's not only doubling down on this top-driven Common Core, but he's cutting the budget for professional development. That's a mistake. What we're seeing, Brian, is you're seeing teachers who are in the prime of their life ready to really mentor, who are retiring early because they just are so disillusioned by what's going on here. And the same with parents. My parents across the 11 counties, they're very upset with this. So, we need a whole new direction in education. I think that's one of the reasons why I've earned the support of the teachers. I've gotten their endorsement 2 election cycles in a row. Is because as a product of public schools myself, and for Mary Jo and I, our kids go to public school. We're very involved in the public school, and we support our public schools. I also support charters, so I don't think it's an either-or a point here. I think that we should focus on excellence in education, and that means we also support strongly public education. And one final point on this, Brian, and I think this was the overall gist of what the New York Times was trying to say, surprisingly, coming from the New York Times. But what they were writing is that over the course of my 6 years, a little over 5 now, since I retired from the Army, I've been able to earn the strong support of our base, conservatives and Republicans, independents, and a fair number of Democrats. I'm in a congressional district that President Obama won twice. The pundits in D.C. described this congressional district as what they call a D+1. I was one of 3 Republicans in the country that was serving in what was described as a Democratic seat, and I was outspent by my last opponent in 2014 by over 2-1, and we won by 30 points. So we crushed our opponent, even though I was in Democratic territory and I was being outspent. So I have an ability to bring people together to get things done, and I think the point of the New York Times article is, and they were illustrating with the teachers, is that I have a viability that if I decide to run for governor, that I can be successful, and I can win, and we can change the trajectory of this state.
Talking with Congressman Chris Gibson. Going to take a break right now. Back in just a moment. Congressman Chris Gibson, our guest today on the Newsmaker Show. Congressman, you were known early on for wanting to go to Washington to downsize Homeland Security and the Department of Education. Wondering, are there any agencies or offices in Albany you'd like to see downsized or completely cut?
Well, look, you got 20 departments there, and we can absolutely look at the effectiveness of those 20 departments. Indeed. I mean, in my time in the military, too, we're always looking for efficiencies. Are there better ways that we can employ the taxpayers' investments so that we can get the services, the necessary services that we're looking for in a manner that's most cost-effective? So, I've only begun to look at that. Candidly, Brian, there's much more examination that needs to be done, but it is an issue area that we absolutely can put a focus on. Likewise, in the federal government, this is, Tom Reed and I'm honored to serve with Tom I think one of our achievements since we've been there, and really it reflects the people's achievement, because the historic election of 2010 changed the trajectory of American politics. It's not often mentioned on the media, by the way, and even on, such outlets as Fox, you don't hear this, but we have cut the deficit by over 70%. And, I'll tell you, the deficit, the annual deficit, my last year in the Army was almost $1.5 trillion for a single year. That's unconscionable. It's unsustainable, and it's immoral. When you talk about making sure that future generations are set up for success, that they have the same choices and freedoms that we have to get back to a balanced budget. And we have cut the deficit now by over 70%, and, we're within reach of a balanced budget. We need to get all the way back to a balanced budget, and when we get there, we need to stay there so that then we can begin to pay down the debt. So part of that means going through the federal bureaucracy and finding ways for efficiencies so that we can cut those expenses and get back to a balanced budget.
Congressman, you'll be in Corning on Thursday, and we're down to just about a minute. You'll be in Corning on Thursday with the Republicans there. Can you tell us what the topics will be?
Well, first of all, I'm there to support. I just want to say what an honor it is to serve with Tom Reed. I'm there to also support our local candidates. I know we got some important races there for DA with Keith Slepp and also clerk with Rob Chrisman. And then also, I want to outline, I want to communicate what your House of Representatives have been doing, because we are listening to the people. We are working on legislation and reform that is in concert with what the American people are looking for. And I think part of our challenge, here I'm talking about a Republican challenge, is we need to communicate. And so you'll be able to hear from me these main points in terms of what we're doing to protect this exceptional way of life, to grow the economy, to cut the deficit, to provide for, among other things, cures for maladies such as cancer and Alzheimer's and heart disease, and those on the spectrum and those with Lyme disease, and also what we're doing to roll back Common Core and to protect our Bill of Rights. So, and I'll be closing with how important it is that we keep faith. Because this is, I have to tell you this, Brian, among all the challenges we have, the one that really concerns me is that I'm finding Americans who are losing faith in our ability to be self-governing. We absolutely need to keep the faith. We need to revitalize our spirit. And I think that's really important for the 21st century. So I hope folks will come out. Look forward to being there very soon. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this show with you, Brian.
Congressman Chris Gibson, want to thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Congressman Chris Gibson, on the Newsmaker Show on AM 1480 WLEA Hornell.